Jesus is very famous for saying, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And this, you might say, is the subtext of the history of Western thought and philosophy. That truth, as the single absolute thing, is the basis for a good life. When I understand what is real, then I have the basis for controlling my life and bringing myself to my true flourishing. Know thyself assumes that there is a self to know, there is a truth to know, and that the goal of the wise person should be to understand the truth. But if we have truly understood what Nietzsche has done, then we will understand that he has given the lie to this statement. He is actually saying that what really makes for a good life is not the truth. Schopenhauer has given us the truth about existence, and that doesn't lead to a good life. It leads to despair. It leads to a philosophy of negation, self-negation, denial of life, and escapism. So then, if value is the basis for life, but values are what we create, then it's not the truth that sets us free, it's the correct kind of lie. So what he's pointed out for us is the striving that makes for existence is based on a contradiction that must be there. We must create our values. It's the very nature of the will to power to create values and gods for ourselves. Our gods are simply the embodiments of those values, aren't they? But if we believed that we created them, they would have no hold over us, would they? If I believe that I'm the one who sets the value for my own existence, then I will be like Schopenhauer and say, well, then it doesn't really have value, it's constructed. And so I must, besides creating value, do it in such a way that I fool myself into believing that they're absolute and eternal. That's the only way that I would be willing to give up my present comfortable state of existence for a future risky state that will always involve suffering to achieve. And so I must be willing to suffer for my values, but that means I must believe they're greater than I, and I must be willing to die to my present self for my values. That's why Jesus could say, whoever tries to keep his own life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, what? For the sake of your ultimate God and value, will gain it back again. Nietzsche fully agrees with that religious sentiment. He believes that religious sentiment, that value sentiment, is what really gives us hope for life. But it's a lie, isn't it? And so what we must believe is a lie for it to work, for our life to really have that kind of meaning that allows our suffering to produce our future selves and a greater self and real life. But now here's our problem. The age of science, the age of reason that was given birth to by this belief in a logos, an ultimate God who is rational, has actually produced an era of science that now rejects this God. We have seen how Schopenhauer and the modern scientific age has striven to create a worldview that is godless. And thus we can no longer believe in the old good and God that came along with Boethius. That system of value and the God that embodies it, the good, no longer holds sway over us. We have realized that we have created this value, and therefore we can't believe in it anymore. And this is the basis for his statement, God is dead. Many of you have heard of Nietzsche, but you've heard of him through that phrase, God is dead, and you've misunderstood it. You believe that somehow Nietzsche believed that there was a God and that God died and we killed him, and now, no. He's talking about the idea of God, because it's the idea of God that is created by our value system, the Judeo-Christian Greek value system that comes out of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Jesus and Moses, all combined together to produce the world that we live in. But that world is no longer viable. That value system no longer can hold sway over us because we can't believe it anymore, because we can't believe in the God that grounds it, as we saw. That the whole system of virtue and morality that we built up for ourselves in the West presupposes this ultimate intention and standard and eternal standard behind all of our life that makes our lives worth living, and that we judge our own individual lives by in the very living of our lives. That has died in our secular age. We are in an age that now has denied God. That's what he means by God is dead, that the power of the idea of God has lost its sting. No longer is it what really rules our world. And in order for you to see this, just think about this. How many of you, if I asked you this question, let's say you were depressed, and you realize that this depression's been going on for several weeks now, and you have no energy, and you just don't even want to get out of bed, and you don't have any energy to do anything. How many of you would go see a priest? Or how many of you would go see a psychiatrist? How many of you would believe that it has to do with your ideas of happiness and the meaning of life, and therefore would seek out to learn what is it about my life that I don't understand? Or how many of you would say, well, this is a brain lesion or a lack of serotonin in my synapses, and therefore I need to take some Prozac or Wellbutrin in order to cure this physical ailment of mine? Most of you would probably go the psychiatric medical route, wouldn't you? And what does that show you? That shows that even if you say you believe in God, you don't act like it. The idea of God as giving meaning to your life is not what really holds sway over the way you live your life. Actually, you live in an age that is godless. Think about the state that we live in and the ideals that we hold that ground that state. We all agree with Aristotle that a state is a commonwealth. In other words, that America, United States, is in existence for the common good of the citizens. But if you notice, we believe in what is called the separation of church and state. We believe in the West, in other words, of a secular state, a state that can define the good without God. But if the state is the ground and the community which grows good citizens and therefore good humans, but it can do so without religion, without the gods, then that God is dead, isn't it? So this is what Nietzsche means by God is dead, is that the value system that Christianity created for the West is still there, but the God that grounded it is no longer believed in, no longer has sway. We live consciously now in a contradiction, and that we can't do. And so God is dead is the idea that the old king that ruled our lives is dead. Now, there's a saying in England, in a lot of monarchies, when the king dies, they say, the king is dead, long live the king. Now that sounds like a contradiction, but it isn't. Because the king is dead is talking about the king that just died. Long live the king is talking about the new king that has succeeded the old king. And therefore, we wish this king long life. The idea is in the English monarchy, there cannot be an England without a king. There cannot be a good life without a God, Nietzsche says. So he's saying God is dead, but we need to believe that God is eternal. There needs to be new gods. It's not that he's saying, look, now we need to live in an atheistic society. He doesn't believe that's possible. He doesn't believe morality or values can really hold sway and therefore push the striving of our life toward human greatness. unless we believe that they're absolute and eternal. We need the gods. The old God has died, the new gods have yet to come, and that is the problem of modern man. Modern society, the gods are dead and we refuse to believe it, and therefore we have refused to create new goods and new evils and new gods that will continue the progression of the human race. And so, he believes that we need to understand that the old God is dead and we need to bury God's corpse. What is God's corpse? Well, it's the value system that's left over. It's interesting that most of our values are based on the Christian ideals of mercy, unselfishness, sacrifice, forgiveness, and compassion, isn't it? That's why a school like Salve is in existence. That's why we call our mission a mercy mission. It's very interesting that also, along with that, we claim that we're a school in the Catholic intellectual tradition, but one that does not hold it as a dogmatism. We seek mercy, but without tying it to a specific god or religion. Nietzsche would say this is a contradiction. Our God is dead, and all we have left is the corpse. We need to bury it. So most of his philosophy is centered on burying the God of the Christian tradition. What does that mean? Well, it means showing how, and here's where truth is good for you, showing how the value system that we still accept is based on 4 major prejudices or myths. That's why the main book we're reading, Genealogy of Morals, is called a genealogy. A genealogy means that it had parents, that it didn't always exist, that this morality isn't eternal, and this, like any being that has parents, you will have children and you will die. And so by calling this a genealogy of morals, he's arguing that the progenitors are dead, our ancestors are dead, and we need to bury them. What are these myths? Well, the first is that all traditional morality is built on the idea that there is a such thing as human nature, an essence of what it means to be human. And therefore, humans are basically the same, and we only differ in the unessential and accidental aspects of our lives. I hope you all see why that is essential for saying things like, love others as you would have them love you, right? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Yes, but what if they're very different from me? What if I like this, but they don't like that? If I were to do to them what I would like done to me, I have to assume that they're basically the same as I. So this is essential for the traditional morality of the Golden Rule. He's saying this is a myth, and he's going to prove it wrong. Another myth of our basic moral system is that we can know ourselves. Because the idea behind all moral action is that you do it deliberately. In other words, that you know what you're doing. But if you don't know yourself, if you can't know your basic motivations, then you can never know what you're doing. And therefore, the whole basis for understanding whether you are doing something moral falls away. But of course, as we saw, the real foundation for all this is the notion of voluntary or free action. We believe that there are moral laws, but we can only believe in moral laws if we believe that we can be responsible for our actions, that therefore we can be blamed or praised for our actions. But that cannot take place, we saw, unless we are free. If everything we do is determined by something other than ourselves, then it follows that there can be no moral responsibility, and therefore no real moral law. And finally, the biggest prejudice of all, the one that is so unquestioned that to even question it sounds like we're a demon, is that unselfishness. The core of the traditional morality, Christian morality, unselfishness, altruism, self-sacrifice, love, compassion, mercy, that this is good for you. So the rest of the lectures on Nietzsche are all going to, step by step, show how he undercuts all of these prejudices and shows that they are nothing but prejudices and in fact false. Why is he planning to do this? Because we have to bury the corpse of the old God. The new gods cannot come, and therefore the new motivation for human progress cannot come until God is not only recognized as dead, but buried, and the new gods come. Gods that will have the kind of sway to convince us of a new lie that pushes us to new realities. Beyond good and evil requires the death of good and